It all started with a notification on my phone. It was an invitation through the Campus Social Connect Plus that I used primarily to keep up with my classes and college classmates. The message was from a guy named Dante, someone I barely knew by sight. It said something like, "Beach party this Friday, cool people only, bring your best vibes and something to drink, don't miss it." Believe me, I ignored it at first because I wasn't one to go to parties with people I barely knew, but then while I was checking my fit, I saw that several classmates had confirmed their attendance, even some who didn't even seem like the kind of people who wanted something like that. There was something about the event description that intrigued me, something that made me feel like it was an opportunity one couldn't pass up. Friday came and, after thinking about it, I decided, I don't know why, but something inside me told me that I had to be there. The beach wasn't that far from campus, but it was a secluded place far from the city. When I arrived, already had a group of people gathered around a bonfire. The music was blaring and the air smelled of salt and something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but it made me uncomfortable somehow. Dante stood in the center of it all, as if he were the perfect host. He was wearing an open shirt and a necklace with a strange symbol that shone under the light of the bonfire. He greeted me with a wide smile as if we were old friends. "Come with us," Miguel shouted, pointing at me with a bottle of liquor. Welcome at last. I felt a little out of place out of boredom, but I tried to relax, drank a little, talked to some classmates, and for a moment, everything seemed normal until I noticed something that was changing. The music suddenly stopped and Dante raised his hands to get everyone's attention. "Guys, it's time for what we came to see," he said with a smile that rocked my skin. I watched as they brought out wide ceremonial shoes wrapped in black ribbons and some prop skulls like they put out on Halloween. They arranged them in a circle in the sand, and someone drew strange symbols around it as if they were preparing something. I didn't know what it was, but I felt like I had to leave. However, something kept me there, as if my feet were glued to the sand. That was strange, as I had impulses, but I couldn't leave in any way. "This is just a game," Dante said, looking me straight in the eyes. "It's something to remember tonight." The group, most of them philosophy students, began to chant in a language I didn't recognize. The words sounded cultural, as if they weren't made to be spoken by humans. Those torches increased in intensity and the wind began to blow hard, blowing everything out at the same time. Everyone gave a gasp of amazement, but I was wondering what the heck they were trying to do with that. The air turned chilly and I felt a kiss on my chest as if something was watching me from all sides. "I call upon him who listens from the depths," Dante shouted, raising a goblet filled with a dark liquid. "We offer you this night in exchange for your—" Everyone laughed as if it were a joke, but I couldn't laugh. I felt something, a vibe, a presence that I couldn't explain. I looked around, hoping someone else would notice, but everyone seemed to be enjoying the show. When the ritual ended, everything went back to normal. The music came back, the campfire lit up again, and people kept drinking and laughing as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't get that feeling out of my head that something was wrong. I left early without saying goodbye to no one. On the way home can help but look back as if someone was following me. The beach became silent and dark, but that feeling that something was watching me didn't go away. When I got home, I went to bed trying to convince myself that it had all been a figment of my imagination. But in my dreams I heard those cultural words again and saw those symbols drawn in the sand glowing with a dark fire. I woke up sweating and with my heart racing, looked at my phone and saw that I had several notifications. They were messages from friends who had been at the party. They all said the same thing. "Did you see what happened with Dante? Something is wrong. We shouldn't have done that." I didn't understand what was happening, but something told me that that night on the beach had triggered something that we couldn't control, and the worst thing was that, at some point during that ritual, I had also thought about asking for something that I now feared had been granted to me. The days following the lines were strange. I tried to convince myself that it had all been a bad idea, a stupid idea from bored college kids looking for cheap thrills, but I couldn't get that feeling out of my head. Something had changed, like the world around me had gotten darker and heavier. On Monday at university I noticed something wasn't right. He wasn't in class before and no one seemed to know where he was. I casually mentioned it to a couple of classmates, but they looked at me with a strange expression as if they didn't want to talk about it. "Didn't you hear?" Anna, a girl who had been at the party, asked me. Her voice shook slightly when I realized what I asked, although something in her tone made me wish I didn't know the answer. "Dante had an accident last night. His car went off the road. They say he didn't survive and that he had marks all over his body. But also, those who saw him said that a shadow caused everything. Something had been chasing him since he had made that call on the beach." I felt a chill run down my spine. I couldn't believe it. Dante, the guy who always seemed to have everything under control, was dead. I tried to convince myself that it was just a tragic coincidence, but I couldn't ignore that voice in my head that told me something didn't quite fit. That same afternoon I received another piece of news. Marcos, another one of those who had been at the party, had been found in his apartment. He had taken his own life. He left no note, no explanation, just a silence that echoed louder than any words. It doesn't make sense, I told Anna as we walked through the campus. Marcos wasn't the kind of person who would do something like that. Anna didn't answer and she just looked at her other side as if she was avoiding saying something. What's going on? I asked, stopping in front of her. Do you know something I don't? She took a deep breath before answering. Not just Dante and Marcos, she said quietly. Sarah is also dead and it seems that others have had accidents. Others? I asked, feeling panic start to take over me. Anna nodded, looking at me with eyes full of fear. Everyone who was at the party around what Dante did and participated in some way is suffering things, that's what we know. I felt the ground move under my feet. It couldn't be real, it was impossible, but the news was there, on my phone, in conversations in the hallways. People who had been on the beach that night were dying, having almost fatal accidents. It was one after another in strange and horrible circumstances. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those symbols drawn in the sand, raising their goblets full of dark liquid, and eventually I found out that it was human blood for a sacrifice he carried out that night. It was crazy. I decided then to investigate a little. I couldn't sit there waiting for something to happen. I searched the internet, books in the library, anywhere I could find information about rituals and invocations, something that would explain what had happened that night. It was then that I remembered that during the ritual, in some moment of weakness, I had been thinking about something. I had wished for success, for knowledge, for something that would make me feel important. I had done it almost without realizing it, as if that dark entity had been listening to my thoughts. It can't be, I muttered, but I knew it was true. That night, while I was trying to study, I heard a noise at my window. I approached it slowly, trying to convince myself that it was just the wind, but when I pulled back the curtain, I saw something that paralyzed me. There in the darkness was a figure. I couldn't make out its face, but I felt it was staring at me. Its eyes glowed with a reddish glow and were menacing. I stumbled back from my chair, and when I looked again, the figure had disappeared, but the window pane was marked with something. It was some kind of symbol, one similar to the one they had drawn in the sand that night. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something had been unleashed and was coming for us. The next day I decided to seek help. I had heard Matteo, a college friend who had dedicated himself to the occult, talk about it. I didn't know if I believed in such things, but at that moment I didn't have many options. I told him what I needed. Talk to him about the party on the beach. Matteo looked at me with a serious expression, as if he already knew what I was going to talk about. You shouldn't have gone, he said quietly, but now that you're involved in this, there are things you should know. And then he told me the truth. We moved away from people a little, where no one could hear us. Matteo took me to a secluded corner so that no one else could hear us. His face, usually relaxed and sarcastic, was now tense, almost pale. What do you know about what happened on the beach? She asked, staring at me. Not much, I admitted, feeling my voice shaking. It was just a ritual, something that seemed like a joke, but now there are people dying and also getting sick or having accidents. Matteo slowly felt as if she knew all that. It wasn't a joke. Dante knew what he was doing. He summoned something at the party. What are you talking about? I asked, although deep down I already knew the answer. Well, a demon, Matteo said bluntly. That ritual wasn't just a game, it was a real summoning, and everyone who was there, including you, made some sort of pact. Just by being at the meeting, something will happen to them. It was a real summoning, and everyone who was there, including you, made some sort of pact. I felt the air getting heavier, as if the walls of the library were closing in around me. A pact, I repeated, trying to understand. If I didn't do anything, I was just there watching. Matteo leaned forward and his eyes were shining with an intensity that made me step back. It doesn't matter if you participated actively or not. You were there present, and at that moment maybe you thought of something you wanted, right? Something you wanted with all your might. When I had thought of success, of being someone important, I had wanted it so intensely that I could almost feel it. Yes, I admitted, feeling a lump in my throat, but it was only a thought. For them that is enough, Matteo said. Listen, Lucas, they hear everything, and when you make a pact, even in your mind, they give you what you ask for, but there is always a price, and above all, when they perform these kinds of rituals, a price, I asked. Although Mika knew something, a blood answer for example, her voice sounded like a whisper. The entity they invoke does not do favors for free, it charges, and charges quite dearly. Everything they are paying for now. That thing takes away something they love, and by not being able to do it, they simply die. That thing takes it as a tribute, and I asked, feeling fear take over me, what will happen to me? Matteo didn't answer. He immediately looked at me with an expression that I couldn't decipher, but it was as if he was struggling with something. You made a pact too, the entity finally said. It will come for you, but maybe there is a way to save itself. And how do I do it? I asked, desperate. You have to pay the price before it does, Matteo said. You have to sacrifice something that means a lot to you. If you don't, the entity will take what it wants, and it won't be something you are willing to lose. And how do you know all this? I asked, feeling my voice crack. Matteo lowered his gaze as if he didn't want to answer, but he finally sighed and looked at me again. Because I was there too, I made a pact too. The silence that followed was deafening. I didn't know what to say or what to think. It all seemed too real and too scary. And you, I asked finally, what are you going to do? I already paid my price, Matteo said, and lifted the sleeve of his shirt. On his arm was a mark with a dark symbol that seemed burned into his skin. I offered him what I loved most, my sister, and that thing took her before me, and I don't regret it. It was worth it, but it wasn't enough. That thing is probably going to keep asking me for more at some point, she asked, feeling fear turn into panic. Matteo slowly sensed the entity they summoned. It's female, it's an ancient and dark thing, and now it's here among us. At that moment I heard a noise behind me. I turned around expecting to see someone, but there was nothing. However, nearby I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a shadow that moved quickly and then disappeared. Then, at that very moment, I felt something cold brushing my arm, as if someone was touching me, and the scariest thing of all is that I had a vision. It was a vision of my mother. Fear gripped me like never before. I knew what that meant. The entity wasn't just coming for me, it was coming for everything I loved. I quickly said goodbye to Matteo and left. The image of my mother in my mind was like a warning that was chasing me. I knew I didn't have much time. Matteo had told me that the entity always took its toll, and if I didn't pay it, it would do it for me. I ran home feeling like every shadow in the street was chasing me, carrying with it a murmur that I couldn't understand, but felt directed at me. When I finally arrived, my mother was in the kitchen making dinner as if nothing was wrong. I told her that we had to leave immediately. She looked at me with concern, but before I could respond, I heard a noise at the window. I turned around and saw something that took my breath away. It was that thing Matteo had told me about. It wasn't possible, but in the reflection you could see a figure, right? I can describe it in exact words because it didn't have a defined form. It was like a shadow made of dark smoke with some kind of glowing eyes. It was a presence that was filling space, and everything had turned to the side. Suddenly, my mother screamed when she felt those manifestations and asked what was happening, but I couldn't move. At that moment, something inside me broke. I couldn't let anything happen to my mom. I couldn't let that dark thing take what I loved the most. I screamed at it to take me. The entity stopped as if it was considering my offer. Then I could see that it smiled, but not with its mouth because it didn't have one. I just felt in my mind that it was smiling, and it was doing it in a cold and cruel way, and then everything happened very quickly. I felt an intense pain in my head, as if something was tearing me from the inside out. I fell to the ground screaming while my mom tried to help me, but she couldn't touch me. It was as if I was trapped in a bubble of pain and darkness. The last thing I remember is the sound of a siren, and then everything went black. I woke up in a hospital. The white light from the ceiling blinded me for a moment, and it took me a few seconds to realize where I was. My body felt like it had been crushed, and my head was throbbing with a dull pain. I turned around and saw my mother sitting next to me with her eyes swollen from crying. When she told me what had happened, I didn't believe it. She fell to the floor, convulsing and in pain. She couldn't explain what had happened. At that moment, a nurse entered the room. It was a woman. A young man with brown hair and a kind smile approached my bed and checked my vital signs. But then something changed. His smile faded and his face became cold and empty. His eyes, which had been warm before, now glowed with a reddish glow. My mother didn't see this, but I did. I heard those words too. He was saying that my debt was paid. I stood frozen, unable to speak or move. The nurse returned to normal as quickly as she had changed, as if nothing had happened. She told me to rest, smiling. When she left the room, I looked at myself in the mirror on the wall, and then I saw it. I had lost an eye and several fingers on my hand. I don't know how, I don't know when, but I was there bandaged as if it had been torn off completely, and not only that, part of my face was marked as if something had burned it. It was weeks before I could leave the hospitals. When she left the room, I looked at myself in the mirror on the wall, and then I saw it. I had bandages on my head, I don't know how or when, but it was there. They're bandaged as if something had been torn off my head, and not only that, part of my face was as if marked. The entity had taken its toll. It was weeks before I could leave the hospital. My mother took care of me all this time, but I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't say that it was all my fault, that I had unleashed something that almost killed me. I didn't look good after everything that happened to me. Supposedly something hit me in the head that made me fall, something related to blood pressure or something similar, something quite rare for my age. It practically left me useless. I can't do many things, I can barely walk by myself. The worst thing is that months later I still feel her presence. Sometimes at night I hear whispers in my mind and I know that she is there watching me and waiting for me. I don't know if I will ever get paid again. I don't know if this is the end or just the beginning, but I do know one thing. That night on the beach when I participated in that ritual, my life changed forever, and although I have lost a lot and although I have paid a terrible price, at least I still have my mother.